My name is Chase McCarty, and today I'm going to be doing an install of vSAN 6.6. But I'll be starting fresh with 4 nodes. I don't have vCenter installed or anything. I'm going to use the easy install mechanism to basically enable vSAN on the first host, get everything up and running specific to the VCSA and that single node. Then I'm going to add a couple nodes, and then I'm going to use Config Assist to help me complete the deployment process. So to get started, I use the vCenter Server Appliance Installer. I'll click Install, and I need to accept my license agreement. I'm just going to use a normal small install with the embedded platform services controller. And I need to specify my host. All right, I like short names, so I'm going to rename this to VCSA. And I'll just choose a small deployment size in case I decide to grow it at a later time. Now we typically at this point would choose a data store on our target host to deploy the VCSA to. In this particular case, I'm going to select this new feature, which is part of Easy Install. I want to install on a new vSAN cluster. Right, so if I choose this, say install on a new vSAN cluster, and I'm going to use some small names here too. So we'll just call this data center, and we'll call this cluster. Now I've got quite a few disks here. They're all claim for cache, listed as claim for cache. And the reason being is these are all flash devices. Now obviously we can't have a all cache configuration of vSAN. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort by the capacity size. And I'll see I've got two 200 gig drives, and I've got I think about 6 400 gig drives. So I'm going to choose each of these 400 gig drives, and I'm going to claim them for the capacity tier. What this is going to do is this is going to evenly split these two guys up into 2 disk groups on this particular host. Now, if these drives were, let's say, presented as RAID 0 as opposed to presented pass-through or JBOD as they are now, they may show up as a HDD disk. At that point, I would want to mark them as flash. In this particular case, these are flash, so I'm not going to have to worry about doing any type of marking for what they really are, because they are truly being seen for what they are. Now, I am going to enable thin disk mode. I'm not going to worry about deduplication and compression just yet, because I do want to deploy thin. And then I'm going to give my VCSA settings here. I've got a little domain called vcorp.com. And I'm going to put in my networking information here. All right, and I'm going to finish. Now at this point, we're going to enable vSAN. In the process of enabling vSAN, we're going to create some disk groups. Again, I mentioned this previously. We've got a couple 200 gig drives which are going to be used for cache. And then beyond that, what we'll do is we'll use the other 400 gig drives for capacity. So once we've enabled those disk groups or enabled vSAN and added those disk groups, then we'll have a place to upload our VCSA to. Once that VCSA is uploaded, we'll get it powered on, and we'll go through the basic initial configuration of that VCSA appliance. Once that initial configuration is complete, we'll then go and perform an SSO configuration for that VCSA. Now that we've deployed the vCSA appliance, we'll go and set up the SSO configuration for that vCSA. Enter a couple NTP servers. In our SSO configuration, we'll use the default of vSphere.local. And when we're prompted to choose whether or not we want to use the Customer Experience Improvement Program, CEIP, for us to use some of the cloud analytics specific to vSAN Health, we will want to make sure that CEIP is enabled. If you'd like to know more specifically to CEIP from VMware, we do have on VMware.com more information specific to the data that we are gathering with CEIP. Now that the appliance has been completely set up, if we scroll down a little bit, we'll see that we have some additional vSAN configuration instructions. We have to add at least 3 more hosts to the cluster. We have to make sure that the hosts have a network adapter enabled for vSAN traffic. We can go to Configure vSAN and under General, click Edit to complete the configuration. So easy install is complete. We've got one host up and running, and we've got the vCSA running on top of that single host. We'll go ahead and click Close. We can then log into the vSphere web client to complete our configuration. Let's go ahead and get rid of this nag screen here. We'll see the data center we created called data center, as well as the cluster we created called cluster. We'll see our single host and the vCSA that we deployed. We'll see that we have an individual host, again, with vSAN configured. We look at disk management. We'll see that we have 2 disk groups, each disk group with a single cache device, 3 capacity devices. Let's go add some additional hosts to our cluster. All right. Now, if we take a look at our cluster, we see one host has 2 disk groups, but the other hosts don't have disk groups. We also see that the hosts are in different network partitions. If we refresh, we'll see that this doesn't change. Now we're probably showing host number 4. Now this is a new addition to vSAN 6.6 where we add configuration assist. Configuration assist is a new feature in vSAN 6.6 that gives us the capability of configuring many of the aspects of vSAN in a single location. If we look at our network configuration, we see that all hosts do not have a vSAN VMK NIC configured. We'll need to do that, but we'll do that in just a moment. We see that all of our hosts are on a different partition. Now this is a warning, not a failure, but we recommend vMotion among all the hosts as well. Now more informational, we don't have any VDSs configured for vSAN. We can notice here that we don't have a VDS for the entire cluster. So let's back up to using a VDS for vSAN and we'll get started here. We'll create a VDS and we're going to call this VDS dash vSAN. And what we want to do is we want to pick our 10 gig connections. We can migrate a switch, but we're going to create a new VDS. And we click Finish. Now what this now does is this initiates an API call to the vSAN cluster, basically saying each host that contributes to the vSAN cluster needs to be added to the VDS. It's very easy in that we don't have to individually choose hosts. We basically take the configuration settings of the two 10 gig NICs that we saw just a moment ago, and we then configure that for each of the hosts. So now that we have a VDS for the cluster, let's go and let's create some VM kernel NICs for vSAN traffic. As we can see, we've got all of our hosts. Currently they're using VMK0. We want to choose the distributed switch VDS vSAN. We want to make sure we're choosing vSAN traffic. We're going to use the port group that was created. Now if we notice when we press tab here, the additional hosts, the second, the third, the fourth, are going to take an IP address that's sequential. We can set our MTU, but we're going to leave that as 1500 for the purpose of this demo. So now we're executing a command against the entire cluster, create a VM kernel port for each node. Notice now if we expand vSAN configuration, we don't see any networking errors. We do have all hosts with a vSAN VM kernel NIC. Now let's go and claim some disks. This is going to be a little bit time consuming, but we'll go ahead and claim disks here. We now see all of our 400 gig disks carved up as capacity tier, and we see our 200 gig disks carved up as capacity tier, cache tier rather. We do have the capability of changing these. However, this is correct for our configuration, so we'll proceed with them as they are. Do a quick little refresh and see where we are. Look at disk management very briefly. We should see some disk groups being created. A couple more to add. All right. So we take another look at configuration assist, perform a retest. We now see under vSAN configuration, we have vSAN enabled and all disks claimed. So we're green. Let's look at our network configuration. The only thing we're missing is vMotion VMK NIC. We'll cover that in a bit. Let's go look at generic cluster configuration settings. And we'll enable DRS as well as HA. All right. Now that we've got HA and DRS set up, okay, now let's enable a vMotion VM kernel interface. We'll choose vMotion traffic. We'll pick our VDS. We'll choose the vMotion port group. We'll go ahead and perform our burn-in test. To run our burn-in test, it will take us to monitor, and then we'll run our storage performance test, the low stress test. All right. Now all we have left is to look at the controller specific to our installation. We need to look at the firmware. We need to look at the driver. And we need to look at the disk mode. Now to do that, we can go into our updates. And we may see some updates specific to our configuration. If we look under Health and Performance, let's get the latest version of our HCL database. While we're at it, we'll go and turn on the performance service. Let's go back and look at Configuration Assist. And we look at our controller disk group mode is correct. Our driver is correct. The controller is certified. Let's look at our firmware. So the recommended firmware is 25.5.0.0018. What do we have? We're not really certain. Let's look at our updates and do a quick refresh. We see that we're missing the Dell PERC H730 mini management tools for this particular case. Now we can go and manually download this if we wish, or we can download it here, right, for each of these hosts. We do have to accept the EULA from Dell in this particular case. We see that we download the tools. We can look at the tools here, and we can choose to update all of our hosts. And let's do a rolling update. We'll install the VIB on each of our hosts. Fortunately, this does not require a reboot. Let's do a quick refresh. Notice we now see what our current firmware version is. You'll do a quick refresh. Look back at our updates. As we see the tools installed on each host, we're going to see them show up with their current firmware version. All right, now we're on our fourth host here. We'll see that we're missing the correct firmware on all of these hosts. 1, 2, 3, and 4, and they're different versions. Right, so let's go and let's download our proper firmware. Again, we've got to accept a EULA. Now, as we're downloading this, we're going to go and perform the same type of upgrade we did just a moment ago, specific to the vSAN cluster. It's important to keep in mind that we had to have vMotion previously configured as well as have DRS configured for the purpose of what we're about to do. For us to move the VCSA to any one of these hosts in the cluster, as we go and perform a firmware update, because it's ready to install here, for us to move the VCSA to any one of these other hosts, we do have to have DRS and fully automated mode enabled, as well as having vMotion configured. All right, so again, let's choose to perform an update. We'll do a rolling update. And as we can see, it will put hosts in maintenance mode. Host 2 is now in maintenance mode. And then we'll perform an update on that individual host. Once host 2 is patched, we'll perform the update on one of the others until we cycle through the entire cluster. Now host 1 is in maintenance mode and the firmware is being updated. If we do a refresh, we should see that host 2 has the proper firmware loaded. Now host 3. All right, so now we've got our updates installed. If we look at config assist, we now see that we have all greens on hardware compatibility. We have all greens on our vSAN configuration, all greens on our generic cluster settings, all greens on our network configuration, all greens on our burn-in test. If we look at monitor and we go to health specific to vSAN, now if we go look at monitor, we'll see that all of our tests are green. Our vSAN cluster is properly configured. Thanks for taking the time for this long demo. Look for more information specific to vSAN on storagehub.vmware.com. Thanks.